So Cory, you were an entrepreneur in your career before joining Ripple. You were also a journalist. I mean, you were at Bloomberg and as a reporter. Can you give us a little narrative on kind of what brought you through this journey and to Ripple, where you are now?
So about a year ago, 2 years ago, I was speaking at some event in Silicon Valley. I was an anchor at Bloomberg TV and Bloomberg Radio. I had a radio show as well. And I hated the way they do the intros when you do these events, right? They go through your LinkedIn profile and they get to things that are less and less relevant and older, and then you find out he went to college. He likes cats, great. I don't like cats. And I thought, well, I write these intros for myself when I go on TV or other producers, but why don't I write it? And so I happened to be speaking at a venture capital event, and I thought, well, how can I make what I'm going to talk about really relevant to the crowd? And I looked at my sort of career and thought, well, I started Vibe magazine with Quincy Jones. I started Slam magazine. I started TheStreet.com with Jim Cramer. I started this CNBC Silicon Valley bureau. I started this show at Bloomberg TV. I'm kind of a startup guy. And so I was using that as an intro when I go on stage. So I would quite literally walk into this persona of startup guy until I would go back to work at Bloomberg and think, this is not a startup anymore. This is just a job. So I knew I needed to do something different. About a year ago, not even a year ago, Brad Garlinghouse, the CEO of Ripple, called me up to go for a walk. We would do this every once in a while. And he was having all these sort of pain points at the company in terms of describing what the company does, meeting with regulators, new customers and things, and tapped me on the shoulder and asked me if I'd join the company to do that. And I suddenly realized, well, this is exactly what I want to do. I've seen all these high growth startups in Silicon Valley, from Yahoo to Google to Salesforce to I've watched these companies go from, two guys in a garage, quite literally in some cases, to being what they are today. But I've never really been inside of one like that. That's purely a non-media tech company, but I am now.
So give us the current state of Ripple, maybe as a team, and also can you give us a sense of the bigger picture of Ripple in the world of blockchain and cryptocurrency?
Yeah, so we're trying to solve it. So the biggest companies in blockchain, the biggest companies in crypto right now are all companies that trade the assets.
Right.
I think we are the biggest company that's actually doing something with the technology. We've got 300 employees, we've got offices in 7 places around the world, and we're very focused on solving one single problem, and that is the problem moving money across borders. We think it is ridiculous in an era when I can send a text message from here to Rome with emojis and a GIF, or I can send an email from here to Sao Paulo in seconds with an Excel spreadsheet attached to it and all kinds of useful information. But if I want to send money from here to, Mexico City, the fastest way to do it is put $10,000 in a briefcase and fly it there. That's ridiculous. And that is the state of the art right now when it comes to moving money across borders. It's also, not only is it slow, it's really expensive. Yep. The average cost of remittances, the World Bank put out a study a few weeks ago. I'm actually writing something about it for our website. It's kind of a crazy, celebrating the fact that for the first time in human history, the cost of remittances for 2 months in a row was below 7%. It was, I think, 6.94% in October. Well, that's crazy. If businesses tend to have about a 5% operating profit across all types of business, it does not make sense to be global, truly global, for most businesses, because the cost of moving money is so expensive. And then there's the accuracy. The current system in SWIFT has about a 6% error rate, which is like losing power for 1 hour of the day, you just don't know when. So we're trying to solve that problem. So we've written a handful of software products, some of which use cryptocurrency to move money across, move value across borders all over the world, really to create an internet of, not of data, but of value. And being used by financial institutions, banks, remittance companies, and so on, who already are doing anti-money laundering, are already doing the know your customer rules that are required in global finance, but are able to do business in seconds and minutes, not days. And
so for those of us that are new to Ripple and the structure, can you just talk to us about the difference between Ripple and XRP?
Yes, my jihad. There is a cryptocurrency, a digital asset. We call it digital asset because I think cryptocurrency is too sort of limiting of a concept. But there's a digital asset called XRP. The work to create XRP happened before there was ever a company called Ripple. The creators of that asset gifted a bunch to the founders of a company called Ripple, hoping that they would start to create a value around this digital asset. There are many other companies developing using XRP, but somewhere along the lines, the company Ripple became, the digital asset XRP acquired the name Ripple, or people started referring to it as Ripple, and the nascent state of blockchain is such that, some guy in his mother's basement is running the biggest information source on crypto and started using the wrong words, and it's just kind of stuck. So it's been a jihad of mine to get people to understand XRP is a digital asset, Ripple is a software company that I work for.
Got it. Okay, so now that's clear. What are the main challenges that...
Last time I did this on stage, the guy across, having just said that same thing, the guy said, well, okay, if you want to call it that. I'm like, no, it's actually a different thing. That is the actual name. You can't call this the New York Post building. It actually has a different name.
There would be a difference.
There is a difference.
Between those two. Maybe you could talk about some of the challenges now, because you're in a new space. There's a lack of regulation, but there's also increasing regulation. There's scrutiny. There's scams. There's all kinds of weird stuff going on.
Yeah.
The banks that are, obviously, they're threatened by this to some extent, I would imagine, or maybe they're taking advantage of it. Maybe you could talk just about the challenges that Ripple is facing in the global financial sector and especially with banks.
Yeah, I think there's been a real, so we sell software to banks, we sell software to remittance companies, the MoneyGrams and the Western Unions of the world, of which there are thousands, Qualx, Mercury FX, there's just thousands and thousands of remittance companies. There's also thousands of banks all over the world, and that's who we sell to. So some of them want the world to change. Some of them like the way the world is right now. We're definitely on the change side of things. So that kind of determines our customers, right? The customers that really want to gain market share in remittances are interested in our products. The ones that kind of think, we've had potential customers say, what's the matter with T+2? What do you need the money so fast for? It's a common refrain in the industry. I think, we trust banks to do one thing, protect our money. Being innovative is not in the goals of most financial institutions. Yeah. Being safe is. And the reputation of crypto a year ago was money laundering, hitmen, drug marketplaces. That has really dramatically changed. We released a study just 4 weeks ago that I did with an academic in Portland, which found that the sentiment around blockchain has dramatically changed in the last year. And we see most of the companies that we polled are looking at blockchain, trying to figure out if there's a role for them to deploy blockchain in some way in their company and really see it. And many of them have projects already underway or even deployed. And it's a really dramatic shift. And we found that over 40% of the companies we talked to of all different types were looking at blockchain in a serious way. And I think that's a really big shift. I mean, it was probably a year ago. It was November last year. We saw this sort of this enormous run up in the valuation on crypto assets. I think the last story that I wrote for Bloomberg was about a $4 billion company called UBI Blockchain Internet. They had 13 employees in Hong Kong, whose New York address had turned out to be like one of these Regis office places where you rent a desk. Mm-hmm. And the background of the people behind it was not in blockchain or distributed technologies or computer networking. It was a bedwetting. The prior company that had been a bedwetting patch that claimed to have radioactive peptides to stop bedwetting. And that was the state. That was stock went to zero after my story came out. That was sort of the state of art a year ago in the world of blockchain. I think we're in a different place today.
Yeah. Where do you think governments are now in terms of the power of cryptocurrency in their financial systems, and where governments are on this? Where are they on this spectrum of tolerance?
All over. They're all over the place. There are places like China that have banned the trading of crypto assets, but yet most Bitcoin mining, 80%, takes place in China. Mm-hmm. 51% controlled by just 3 companies. Most Ether mining takes place in China as well, but you can't trade the assets there. Places like India have also instructed similar bans, and yet you have countries like Singapore, Switzerland, Malta. I've read more about Malta this year than I've read in my entire life because it has become most crypto trading in the world clears through Malta as of last quarter. Oh. Because that country and the president of the country has made it a personal goal to welcome and encourage entrepreneurs to go to Malta to launch their crypto businesses. I think that there's a recognition by Switzerland, Malta, Liechtenstein, Singapore, that the world is much more global than it was even 4 or 5 years ago. And the entrepreneurs with a great idea don't have to be in Silicon Valley anymore. They can pick up and go to whatever country is going to make it easiest to start their businesses. The U.S. is somewhere in the middle of those sort of extremes of, somewhere between China and Malta sits the U.S. I didn't study geography. The U.S. we've had really thoughtful conversations with the U.S. Trying to understand what this new thing is. The IRS says it's property. The CFTC says it's a currency. The SEC says some are securities and some aren't securities, and hasn't said about most. I think that the U.S. is being very thoughtful about it, but not very fast, and the world isn't waiting. I sincerely hope that I don't have to pick up the family and go to Malta.
What's the weather like in Malta?
It's pretty good. It's actually pretty good. My hockey players would not do well. I don't know how they're going to. They'll dominate Malta. Maybe there's something there. They have an Olympic team. They must.
History is made at this conference.
Winter Olympics in Malta. Yeah. Well, no, we have no intention of going anywhere but the U.S. But I would like the more clarity we get from Washington, and I believe that it's coming, the better for the industry.
I mean, your background, so much of it was in media. Now we've talked about the value proposition of a product like Ripple and some of these other currencies. But what drives your interest in just blockchain and crypto in general right now?
Well, I mean, you mentioned media. I also worked as a hedge fund portfolio manager for a while, and I've had a lot of experience in Wall Street. And I think when I first read about Bitcoin and started to really dig in, it was really fascinating. It looked like this perfect use case for me was securities clearing, because I know a lot about securities clearing, and it's a pain in the butt. But this problem of moving money across borders, so yes, it's a pain in the butt to move. It doesn't make sense to send 50 euro anywhere because it's going to cost you 20 euro to do it probably. Mm-hmm. But it's not possible to send 50 cents. So I think about a world where you could pay someone. I watched this terrific documentary recently called Inventing Tomorrow. My friend Laura Nix produced a documentary, and it was following these kids in a science fair. From all over the world, kids from Mexico, kids from Bangladesh, and this brilliant girl from Bangladesh had this technological solution for whatever. But the idea of being able to pay somebody who's really smart and works really hard and just cannot receive the money and therefore cannot participate in the global economy. Yeah. They can send data, they can send goods through containers in a standardized technology all over the world, but they can't actually get paid. The idea that you could turn on the world's economy by lowering the cost of moving money, I'm so stoked about that. I'm so stoked about the empowerment that capitalism can bring to the world if we can just get the money to places with a better technology. I think it's hard for me to even imagine what that looks like, but I think it's empowering. It's
a great point. I mean, I think we all know that banks' business models are typically to give the wealthy better rates and everything, and they really take advantage of folks that are on the smaller business side, I feel, historically.
Or they don't even serve them. They don't bother
Or they don't serve them. I remember when Square came out, one of the greatest value propositions for early Square customers was just getting paid faster, to your point about T+2. And you think about 2020, I think it's 40% of the American workforce will be an independent professional. So this sort of technology is needed more than ever.
It's intriguing because it can really change things. I think I hesitate to tell a story, but there's this guy.
Tell the story.
No, there's this guy in my neighborhood that does yard work and stuff, and his family stays in Mexico. It's a cliched story, which is why I hesitate to mention it.
They're going to tell us something like secret that we could.
No, it's just
But please.
His name's Juan Garcia, right? It's like a cliche, but he lives in the San Francisco Bay Area. He drives a pickup truck. He sees his family irregularly because they stay in Mexico. He's got a couple of kids. If he makes, let's say he makes, I don't know, $100 a week, probably makes $300 or $400 a week. Lives in the Bay Area, so he's probably got $300 in expenses. He sends $100 to his wife, but it costs him $30 to get it there. Mm-hmm. What if he could send $98 to his wife? His family standard of living goes from $70 a week to $98 a week. Yeah. That's about a 45% increase in the standard of living for that family. That is amazing to me. Are we selling software to banks? Yeah, that's boring. But the idea that we can really change the global economy by empowering people, by giving them their money, that's exciting.
What about, so we've talked a little bit how Ripple in some ways is already working, obviously, for customers, and I know that there's so much going through the system now. Where else is blockchain actually working? Like actually adding material value to society and how it functions? Other examples that you love?
I don't have them because it's early, mm-hmm. and I'm really focused on what we're doing.
Sure.
But there's so much interest in blockchain because there's a price tag attached to it, and it was easy for the knuckleheads at CNBC and Bloomberg, knuckleheads like me, to point at a chart that goes up and to the right and say, here's a price, here's a thing you should get excited about. No one in the general public knew what TCP/IP was when that first sort of started 30, 40 years ago, the early days of the ARPANET. Nobody knew about that because there was no price, because there was no price tag attached to it. So there's tremendous excitement about the idea of blockchain long before there was any use of it. And so a lot of these companies with some really brilliant people are facing off against some really big problems, but they're just not there yet. I have no doubt, when I got my first iPhone, I didn't think there'd be multi-billion-dollar companies created within 5 years that would do things like get me a cab or take a picture. I mean, I grew up in upstate New York, as many of you have suffered the wonderful weather of upstate in the Finger Lakes. It's gorgeous, I know.
I hear.
It's gorgeous. But I grew up in the shadow of Kodak. I didn't think this iPhone was going to create Instagram, right? That happened later. I fully believe that there will be great big businesses built in blockchain. They have nothing to do with the problem that we're going after. Yeah. We're just going after a massive multi-trillion-dollar global problem that I think is more than enough for us to bite off.
And from all you've learned about just blockchain and how it works and can work, do you think there are any areas that people just aren't thinking about yet in terms of how to implement this technology?
Well, by definition, I wouldn't have thought about it yet.
Right. Well, I guess. I mean, you can tell us if you have.
So I think...
maybe you're ahead of the curve.
Occasionally not, but most of the time not. I think there's going to be all kinds of solutions. I do think the inverse. There's a lot of things that people are looking to apply blockchain to that don't work and won't work. And when I talk to people about blockchain ideas, which I do a lot, I'll say, well, why couldn't you do that with a database?
Yep.
And quite often there's not a good answer to that question.
What are the great classic questions to determine whether something should be blockchain enabled or not? I mean, one of them is, could that be done with a database? Should it just be centralized, I guess?
Well, and does it need to be decentralized?
Right.
So we face this with banks, right? Banks don't want, how open source is it and how open source does it need to be?
Yep.
Open source banking is not something anyone with a bank account wants.
Yep.
Right? And yet, if you talk to Bitcoin maximalists, I was giving a talk about 6 months ago, I was fairly new to Ripple. It was this pretty intense conversation about securities regulations and what the SEC was doing and how it differed from securities regulations in Europe. And we were talking for about an hour, and this guy in the back of the room raised his hand and says, well, but what are you going to do when we're all living in space and the world can't support life anymore and you've created a financial system for banks? I said, well, sometime between now and then, we're going to sell software, and then when we're in space, you can work on your space thing. But there are people in the Bitcoin community in particular that really sort of are thinking about a world, somewhere very far off in the distant future where there's no government, no banks. We don't subscribe to the theory that there will be a world without government and banks.
So then, and I guess maybe for a final question, then we'll maybe take a few from the audience before we run out of time. 10 years from now, what do you think, where is Ripple? What is its role in our daily life?
Well, I think it'll be a much bigger company. We'll hopefully have not 100 banks, but many, many more banks. Not a handful of remittance companies, but lots of remittance companies. I certainly hope the company does well and the Johnson family does well as a result. But I think I do really think about, I don't know what it means for employment, for inflation, for the role of other currencies, what it means for global power to have a truly global economy where we can look at the $23 trillion that are laying around in Nostra Vostra accounts that are sort of set up waiting for prepayment because money is so slow. Amazon, probably the most capital efficient company in the history of the world, has $1 billion laying around in accounts to pay employees somewhere or to pay a vendor somewhere because the system moving money is so slow. So I can analyze all that and figure out what that looks like. I can't imagine what a world looks like in 10 years when you can employ that worker in Bangladesh here from the States, or you can move, a Thai nanny can send money home from Japan to pay her family, to have her family have a truly better standard of living in places where an extra $5 a month is a difference, is a life-changing difference. Yep. I can't really imagine that, but I'm pretty stoked about it.
Really exciting. So let's have a round of applause for Cory.
Thank you.
So let's see. Zach, do you want to call for some
questions? We have some time. So we have a few minutes for questions if there are any. Zio, I see one in the back in the corner.
Hi. So my question is, we all know that cryptocurrency industry is going through so many issues, but can you talk about how the tax issues and how IRS is approaching this and how it impacts?
I'm a little trouble here.
How IRS is approaching cryptocurrency? Is that
the tax issues and IRS issues and how it impacts your business?
So it's a great question. So the IRS has decided that that cryptocurrencies are property and should be taxed as property, and the capital gains is based on your like any other capital gains. If it's long term or short term, it's determined by the duration of your holding of the asset, and of course. But the interesting thing is cost. So when my company Ripple was gifted all the XRP that it was gifted at essentially zero cost. So when we sell a little XRP, and we sell a little bit on a regular basis, less than 0.1, 0.2% of all the trading of XRP is us selling it. We're doing that to add liquidity to the markets and also to, pay for my wares. And there's a tremendous tax cost to that. There's, because it came at zero basis. So you can imagine what that is, but that's the way the IRS treats it.
Sorry if this is kind of an elementary question, but is Ripple intended to be like a drop-in replacement for automated clearinghouse or something like that?
Ripple's meant to be a replacement for SWIFT and the messaging system those banks use, and other things like ACH they use to settle transactions. XRP is meant to be a digital way to move value, to move digital money, if you will. And it's really focused on that. So there are other cryptocurrencies. Ether is an example of something that can do all kinds of stuff, including move value. But there was, some people in the industry look at that and say, well, why is Ether so slow to close a transaction? Well, maybe because it's trying to do too much, or just trying to do so much, or it can do so much. XRP is purely focused on value. It can do, Visa-like 1,500 transactions per second, and is really equipped to do things in a digital network that, as I described at the beginning of our talk, we don't have digital value right now. When you send someone a Venmo payment, they don't actually get the money for like 3 to 5 days. They might credit an account, but there's risk being taken by the company there, and that's why the fees are so high. When you use XRP, when one of our customers uses XRP to move money from Thailand to Spain, it happens in less than a minute or two, and it's very accurate and quick to do so, and it wouldn't be possible without that technology.
What is the impact on cryptocurrency when different governments like Venezuela, they came up with their own cryptocurrency, petrol-based? So what will happen with the decentralized cryptocurrency?
What will happen with the decentralized currency?
Yes.
Crypto? Many of I would argue, decentralized apparently is in the eye of the beholder. Some digital assets people think are decentralized, and other people will look at the same one and say it's not. I'll tell you that XRP is 100% decentralized by any notion. I think the notion of centralization changes. I would argue that Bitcoin and Ether are more centralized than they used to be because of the way mining has changed and where the mining has shifted to. XRP is more decentralized than it used to be because my company controls 7% of the validators on the network. We own a lot of XRP, but we don't own enough to alter the votes on the things that the XRP community can do in terms of managing that network. And Ripple may succeed or fail, and I've certainly put my bet towards succeed, but XRP will continue to exist. And the other companies out in the XRP ecosystem that are developing businesses based on that technology will be able to continue to use XRP, whether Ripple's around or not.
Hi, thank you so much for your insights. I had a question about how you think this will impact like global company structure. Like for instance, I imagine if everything's successful, it would be easier for companies to pay and in fact hire people in different places for maybe less than they would pay in town, which some might argue is fantastic, some might argue is kind of exploitative. But I was wondering, like, how do you see like company structure and companies acting over multiple different places over the next few years or 10 years, 20 years, if this becomes commonplace?
I can speculate. It's certainly out of my expertise, but I think that what we've seen in the history of the economy is that the more people involved in the economy, it doesn't actually take jobs away; it adds jobs at the top. So I would expect that what has always been true will continue to be true. I'm not trying to be political or verify caravans or no caravans, but what we know is the more people involved in the economy, the more people are involved in the economy, and the better the economies are. And certainly the transition from one economy to a new economy can be very difficult and unfair to people. But I think that generally we're going to see more people and more companies all over the world be able to do business together. And I think it's fascinating. It's not just changing business as it is today. It's what business might look like in the future, and I think it's going to be very different.
Hey, so I have two questions. First, how is it that Ripple is able to be cheaper than their competitors? And the second is, why can't a centralized company like Western Union just compete, come up with their own software, and just take out the competitive advantage that the company has currently in the status quo?
Both very good questions. So the first one, Ripple, why is it cheaper? For a lot of reasons, it's just cheaper and better, but it's because the technology of XRP allows for transaction to happen really fast. The current state of the art in the financial industry for moving money across borders is based on a messaging platform called SWIFT. SWIFT was written in 1973. SWIFT, it was a consortium. It's run by a consortium of thousands of banks with thousands of employees in Belgium. And in order to make any changes to the SWIFT network, you have to get all the disparate pieces of the financial system essentially to agree to it. So it has not been a home of innovation. And a lot of banks say, "What's the matter with T+3?" Right? I mentioned this before. It's kind of amazing, but they don't really mind the way that world is. And there hasn't been a technological solution to fix that has come up until Ripple's products have arrived. And if it wasn't for XRP technology, you couldn't truly exchange value, thousands of times, in a second. And because it's of that technology, it's why it's able to be so cheap. I'm sorry, your second question?
Like, why can't Western?
Oh, why can't? Yeah. So I think it could. I mean, MoneyGram's not going to agree to a system that's being used by Western Union, right? Mercury FX isn't going to buy software from MoneyGram. It is true that Netflix runs on Amazon Web Services, but I think those kinds of examples are far and few between, where a competitor is using the technology of another competitor. You would think with a network like MoneyGram, or Western Union even, that they would just dominate the business. They wouldn't have any competitors, and yet they have thousands. So you got to ask yourself why. And I think a lot of it is on the end of the network, because MoneyGram and Western Union have some of the best networks ever in the history of finance. They have very, very low costs. Some of their costs, from what I understand, are 1/10 of what their competitors are, and yet they have these competitors. And I think that's because their competitors are offering a better experience, better locations in some places, but doing something that those companies aren't. I get these emails about new customers we've signed up, and I have to say I've rarely heard of them because they're all over the world. But when you walk the streets of Singapore, Hong Kong, there's money changers everywhere, right? You've seen this, and it's just a different world. It's hard for us to imagine the U.S., but there's lots of competition out there, and these businesses are saddled with very high costs.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously this is a pretty interesting new technology. You're moving money across borders and you're changing the rate at which money can cross borders. Can you talk a little bit how that will affect exchange rates? How will exchange rates be managed in a different way going forward? And will it change the global economy because of the changes that Ripple will bring?
Yeah. It's kind of impossible to know. I mean, we've seen some academic work on it. I don't imagine we'll ever get to 100% market share. Maybe a Google thing will happen, but I kind of doubt it. That said, we've seen customers show us product that they're doing developed on us, saying they'll let their customer go onto their iPhone or Samsung phone or whatever and say, I want to move this amount of money. You can move it right now using Ripple for this cost, or you can move it in 4 days for that cost. The only thing is, for us, for using Ripple, it's so much cheaper that the app was. We want them to do that to make us look, to show how great our service is. But I don't know if they'll really have banks. Right now, all of our customers are still doing both. They're still using SWIFT, and they're using Ripple's products. So, I don't know. I think that's true. Actually, I don't know if anyone's 100% on us, but I would expect we will have customers that are only using Ripple's products, and some people like the way the world is. And they'll probably stick with what they're doing. But, it's hard to imagine what happens when you suck away a lot of volume of the trading of currencies and at what point it starts to matter the most. I guess if you think about it, what happened in those places where the currencies are traded the least. So, Mongolian currency rates might get worse. But in very active networks, like, the biggest companies the biggest countries getting remittances, I think, in order are I think it's India, China, Mexico, Philippines. Those are very active corridors with very high, in some cases, very high rates. And I would think that those would still remain pretty competitive.
Cory, thanks again.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Thanks.